Today, we're diving into a story that has major implications for both U.S. politics and the economy: President Donald Trump's global tariffs and the Supreme Court's recent ruling against his approach. Last week, the High Court issued a decision making it clear that the president overstepped his authority by trying to implement a sweeping tariff policy on his own. Trump recently announced that existing tariffs under Section 232 and Section 301 would remain in place, while also signaling plans to impose a new 10% global tariff under Section 122. To give context, Section 122 has rarely been used in this way, and legal experts are skeptical about whether it will hold up if challenged in court. The Supreme Court ruled 6-3 that the president cannot unilaterally impose broad tariffs without Congress's approval. This is a major blow for Trump, who has long claimed expansive powers in matters of trade and has insisted he doesn't need congressional consultation. The court clarified that tariff authority is primarily vested in Congress, not the executive branch. This ruling has immediate consequences for American consumers. Studies suggest that roughly 92% of tariffs are ultimately paid by consumers, meaning everyday items, from groceries to electronics, become more expensive. Public opinion reflects widespread dissatisfaction, with most Americans expressing frustration at the higher costs brought on by the tariffs. Trump responded with sharp criticism of the Supreme Court, particularly targeting the justices he personally appointed, Gorsuch, Barrett, and Chief Justice Roberts. He accused them of being influenced by foreign interests and lacking loyalty to the United States. This reaction underscores a pattern. Trump consistently interprets any setback, even legal, as a personal attack. Despite the Supreme Court decision, Trump announced plans to move forward with a 10% global tariff under Section 122, which he can implement for 150 days before requiring congressional approval. This move puts Republicans in a difficult position, especially with elections approaching. Supporting an unpopular tariff could hurt their standing with voters, yet opposing Trump risks backlash within the party. Republican lawmakers, who initially had an opportunity to distance themselves from these tariffs thanks to the court's decision, now face renewed pressure. Many privately oppose the tariffs but are constrained by Trump's influence and the political dynamics of the party. Trump's approach also bypasses Congress entirely, despite the Supreme Court ruling that this is precisely the authority Congress holds. By moving unilaterally, Trump is not just challenging legal boundaries but also creating political risk for his party. The international impact is significant as well. Countries like Canada and China are adjusting trade strategies in response to U.S. tariffs. Businesses, particularly small and medium-sized enterprises, are facing higher costs for imported goods and supply chain disruptions. Trump's reaction highlighted his focus on asserting control rather than collaborating. He treated the court's decision as a personal defeat and doubled down on his tariff strategy, increasing pressure on his party and causing uncertainty in global markets. Public sentiment is firmly against these tariffs. Polls show that 60% of Americans disapprove of Trump's tariff policies, with 39% strongly disapproving. Still, Republican lawmakers continue to publicly support Trump, constrained by party loyalty and fear of reprisal. Media analysts are weighing in, offering different interpretations. Some view Trump's actions as a demonstration of his political influence, while others see it as creating internal divisions within the Republican Party. The economic implications are vast. Trade relations, domestic pricing, and consumer spending are all being affected. Ultimately, Trump's tariffs, the Supreme Court ruling, and his subsequent decisions have created a complex and controversial situation. It is a legal, political, and economic flashpoint that impacts not only Washington politics, but also the daily lives of Americans. The takeaway is clear. Trump's approach to tariffs has been challenged legally, criticized politically, and felt directly by consumers. As this story develops, it will continue to shape conversations about presidential authority, congressional oversight, and the future of U.S. trade policy. Following the Supreme Court's ruling against his broad tariffs, President Donald Trump didn't take the decision quietly. Instead, he held a press conference filled with anger, confusion, and moments that highlighted both his political style and the tension within the Republican Party. Trump began by doubling down on his economic agenda, declaring that he would move forward with a 10% global tariff under Section 122, even after the Supreme Court clearly limited his authority. Legal analysts quickly pointed out that this statute had rarely been used in this manner, and that congressional oversight could override his efforts after 150 days. This created immediate tension for Republicans in Congress, especially in swing districts, where voters are sensitive to rising costs caused by tariffs. The president's tone at the press conference was combative. He criticized the Supreme Court justices he personally appointed, including Justices Gorsuch and Barrett, accusing them of lacking loyalty and being swayed by foreign interests. For many observers, this was unusual, given that Trump had celebrated these appointments as victories for his political agenda in the past. The press conference revealed a pattern that has become familiar. Trump interprets any legal or political setback as a personal attack. Trump also tried to frame himself as a champion of the American economy, claiming that tariffs protect domestic industries like steel and aluminum. While tariffs are intended to shield U.S. producers, economists note that most of the cost is ultimately passed on to consumers. Studies estimate that about 92% of tariff costs are absorbed by Americans purchasing goods. Everyday items such as clothing, electronics, and toys become more expensive, affecting families nationwide. Republicans in Congress are in a difficult spot. Supporting Trump's plan risks backlash from voters frustrated by higher prices and economic uncertainty. Opposing him, however, risks internal party conflict, especially in a landscape where Trump's influence remains significant. This dynamic illustrates a broader issue: how the Republican Party navigates the tension between loyalty to the former president and accountability to constituents. Even within the party, lawmakers have begun privately expressing concern. Northern states in particular have highlighted the negative effects of tariffs on industries and trade relations. Canadian tariffs, for instance, are proving to be economically disruptive, prompting some Republicans to quietly advocate for adjustments. Despite this, Trump's combative stance makes public opposition politically risky. The press conference also featured moments that drew attention for their unusual and personal nature. Trump made comments about personal attractiveness and interpersonal interactions with world leaders, including statements about the president of Paraguay. While these remarks generated media attention, they also illustrate how Trump's communication style often blends policy announcements with personal commentary, creating a chaotic narrative for the public and lawmakers alike. Media reactions to the press conference were sharply divided. Outlets like Newsmax framed the discussion as a defense of Trump's economic agenda, while mainstream and liberal commentators focused on the legal limits imposed by the Supreme Court and a potential harm to consumers. Analysts emphasize that the Supreme Court ruling is not just a legal setback but also a political one, providing Republicans with an opportunity to distance themselves from unpopular tariffs. The Supreme Court's decision also raises long-term questions about presidential authority. By challenging Trump's unilateral action, the court reaffirmed that major economic policies require congressional involvement. This serves as a reminder that even a president with significant political influence is still constrained by the U.S. Constitution and the separation of powers. For voters, the practical implications are clear. Tariffs have already increased the cost of living, and the potential implementation of new global tariffs threatens to worsen the situation. Families may face higher prices for essential goods, while businesses navigate disrupted supply chains and international trade tensions. Trump's insistence on moving forward with the new global tariff underscores his willingness to prioritize personal political goals over broader economic concerns. By doing so, he places both the Republican Party and American consumers in a challenging position. For lawmakers, this means managing the fallout of unpopular policies while maintaining party unity and preparing for upcoming elections. Internationally, the tariffs create uncertainty in trade relations. Countries like Canada and China are already adjusting their strategies in response, potentially leading to retaliatory measures. This could affect U.S. exports, global supply chains, and international confidence in American economic policy. Businesses are particularly concerned about unpredictability, as it complicates planning, pricing, and contracts with foreign partners. Political observers note that Trump's handling of the Supreme Court ruling and subsequent tariffs is a test of both his influence and the resilience of U.S. institutions. While he continues to assert dominance over his party, the checks imposed by the judiciary demonstrate that the American system has safeguards against unilateral executive action. This tension between presidential ambition and institutional oversight is central to the current political landscape. Despite the chaos, some Republicans see an opportunity. With the Supreme Court's ruling as cover, they may quietly work to repeal or limit the tariffs without publicly defying Trump. This balancing act highlights the complexities of governance in a polarized environment, where political loyalty and public accountability are often in conflict. The segment concludes with a clear picture. Trump's aggressive approach to tariffs has created economic, political, and legal challenges. Republicans must navigate voter dissatisfaction, party loyalty, and legislative constraints, all while managing the fallout of a highly visible presidential decision. Meanwhile, consumers and businesses feel the immediate effects, making this one of the most consequential policy disputes of recent years.
As the dust settles from the Supreme Court's ruling against President Trump's broad tariffs, the long-term implications for both the Republican Party and the American economy are beginning to crystallize. What started as a legal dispute over presidential authority has evolved into a complex political and economic story with lasting consequences. At the heart of this segment is the question: How does Trump's approach to tariffs affect public opinion, party dynamics, and the broader economic landscape? Polling data and political analysis provide some insights. Surveys consistently show that Americans disapprove of Trump's tariffs, with approximately 60% of voters expressing opposition, including 39% who strongly disapprove. This dissatisfaction cuts across party lines, affecting independents and moderate Republicans in particular. The economic impact of tariffs has been tangible. Families are paying more for everyday goods, from electronics and clothing to food items. Businesses face uncertainty in supply chains and international trade agreements, making investment and hiring decisions more complicated. The combination of higher costs for consumers and increased risk for businesses contributes to a growing sense of frustration with the administration's trade policies. Trump's political style, combative, personal, and often unpredictable, complicates the situation for Republicans in Congress. Lawmakers face a dilemma: support Trump's agenda and risk voter backlash, or oppose him and risk alienating a powerful faction within the party. The Supreme Court ruling offers a potential escape hatch, allowing Republicans to distance themselves from unpopular policies without directly confronting the former president. However, the delicate balance of loyalty and accountability remains a significant challenge. The decision also highlights the role of institutional checks and balances in American governance. By limiting the president's authority to impose sweeping tariffs, the Supreme Court reaffirmed the constitutional principle that major economic policies require legislative oversight. This serves as a reminder that executive power, even when backed by political influence, is not unlimited. Internationally, the tariffs and the uncertainty surrounding them have ripple effects. Trading partners such as Canada, China, and European countries are adjusting strategies in response, potentially introducing retaliatory tariffs or seeking alternative markets. These shifts affect U.S. exports, international investment, and the stability of global supply chains. Businesses must navigate this unpredictable environment, further complicating economic planning and growth prospects. For the Republican Party, the situation is both a challenge and an opportunity. On one hand, the tariffs are unpopular and may harm the party's electoral prospects, particularly in swing states where voters are sensitive to economic pressures. On the other hand, the Supreme Court ruling provides cover for lawmakers to address the issue without directly confronting the former president, enabling them to mitigate voter dissatisfaction while maintaining party cohesion. Trump's response to the ruling, doubling down on tariffs and criticizing justices he personally appointed, has reinforced his reputation for prioritizing personal and political goals over institutional norms. While this approach may energize his base, it also risks alienating moderate voters and independent constituencies. For the Republican Party, navigating this tension is crucial, particularly in the lead-up to elections where voter sentiment will play a decisive role. Public perception of Trump's economic policies is further shaped by his communication style. The president frequently blends policy announcements with personal commentary, creating a narrative that is part political strategy, part personal branding. While this approach draws media attention and reinforces loyalty among supporters, it also contributes to confusion, misinformation, and polarization among the broader electorate. In addition to domestic political implications, the tariffs and legal disputes influence America's position in global markets. Other countries are closely watching how U.S. trade policy evolves, which affects negotiations, partnerships, and confidence in American economic leadership. Sustained uncertainty can lead to slower international investment and reduced market access for U.S. exporters, potentially weakening long-term economic growth. Economists emphasize that the cost of tariffs is ultimately borne by consumers, not foreign producers. While tariffs may provide temporary protection for specific industries, they also increase prices for everyday goods, reduce consumer spending power, and create inefficiencies in the economy. These factors can have long-lasting consequences, especially if tariffs become a persistent feature of U.S. trade policy. Looking ahead, the Supreme Court ruling may set a precedent for how future presidents approach trade and economic policy. The decision underscores the importance of legislative involvement in major economic decisions, reinforcing the system of checks and balances. For political strategists, this ruling provides a case study in the limits of executive power and the interplay between law, politics, and public opinion. The long-term political impact of Trump's tariffs is also evident in internal party dynamics. Republican lawmakers are increasingly balancing loyalty to Trump with the need to respond to voter concerns. This balancing act may shape legislative priorities, campaign strategies, and party messaging in the years to come. For some, it may catalyze a re-evaluation of the party's approach to trade, economic policy, and executive oversight. Finally, the situation highlights the critical role of informed, independent media in shaping public understanding. As news coverage ranges from partisan commentary to detailed policy analysis, the public's ability to assess the economic and political implications of tariffs depends on access to accurate, clear information. Independent media outlets and fact-based reporting play an essential role in ensuring that voters can make informed decisions in a complex political and economic environment. In conclusion, the Supreme Court's ruling against Trump's sweeping tariffs has far-reaching consequences. It affects public opinion, consumer costs, party dynamics, legislative authority, international trade, and long-term economic stability.
Republicans face the difficult task of balancing loyalty with accountability, while Trump continues to assert his agenda in a highly polarized political landscape. For voters and businesses, the key takeaway is the importance of understanding the direct and indirect effects of trade policy. While tariffs may seem like abstract economic tools, they have tangible impacts on household budgets, business operations, and global economic relationships. The unfolding situation offers a window into the challenges of governance, the limits of executive power, and the ongoing interplay between law, politics, and economics in the United States.